Hey guys, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the crit cap. So this is going to be a discussion around Fury Prot Warriors, but this can also apply to Fury Warriors as well because you'll see in a few minutes. You'll understand in a few minutes why, but basically it's because we both benefit from the heroic strike bug. I've mentioned the heroic strike bug in a couple of my other videos, and just kind of assumed that everybody knows what it means. And if you don't know what it means, I'm going to go over it right now. So, um, This is a blue post. Obviously, this last was updated April 22nd, 21, which is several years ago, but nothing has changed as far as the heroic strike bug goes. So this is basically a list that Blizzard is saying stop reporting these as bugs because these are not bugs. And if you scroll down, this is the heroic strike bug. So it says offhand attacks that occur while on next hit abilities such as heroic strike are queued do not suffer the dual wield to hit penalty. So essentially what that means is while you have heroic strike queued or cleave, because cleave is also an on next hit ability, while either of those two are queued up, your offhand does not suffer the dual wield penalty. If we want to summarize that even further, what that means is while those two abilities are queued, either one of those two, you can't have them both queued at the same time. But while either one of those two is queued, your offhand hit cap is 9%. It's the same as your main hand for yellow abilities. So as a human, if you're a human with swords, you have or maces, you have 305 weapon skill. That means if you're at 6% hit and you're queuing heroic strike 95% or 100%, whatever, during a fight, your offhand will never miss because it's hit capped as well during. So if you're queuing heroic strike every single second throughout a 30-second boss fight because you're in Bisque gear or near Bisque gear or whatever, or this is the other option would be you're just not spending rage and you're saving rage for heroic strike. I know some warriors that so the typical Fury Warrior priority on your abilities is Bloodthirst first, Whirlwind to second, Heroic Strike third. I know warriors that do Bloodthirst, then more Heroic Strike, then Whirlwind. They use Whirlwind as their rage dump and not Heroic Strike. The reason they do that is because of this bug, because they want their offhand to never miss. And the reason for that is because if your offhand never misses and it hits every single time and you have a high crit rating, when your offhand crits and your offhand is holding a CTS or a AQR or a Hungering Cold, if you're holding a very good end game or near end game weapon in your offhand and your offhand crits, that generates a pretty decent amount of rage. So you got to think about things like that when you're talking about the heroic strike bug. Now, this is going to tie into the crit cap. Now, what is the crit cap? So there's a website. This is I did not write this website. This has been around for a while. Marrow's Compendium of Dragon Slaying is what it's called. It's a guide that Marrow from Heartseeker wrote back in 2020, and a lot of this information has been corroborated. There's two websites that I consider to be I don't want to say there's this website and Meiji's website. So this is github.com, Meiji Classic Warrior Wiki Attack Table. I can put these links in the description. These two kind of refer to each other, but both of them have done quite a bit of testing to actually. So this isn't just, this is what we think happened in Classic. Meiji and the group that helped Meiji did a lot of testing on higher level mobs, and they actually tested out a lot of this information. And a lot of this information can be corroborated if you just go and follow what's in these two websites, and go and look at your own logs, and you'll see that they are correct. So they talk about. So let's go back to this one. So the crit cap. So this is got all kinds of different chapters, right? Mischance, glancing blows, weapon skill. And again, this stuff is on Meiji's website as well. Crit cap. Essentially, what the crit cap is at what point critical strike stops being beneficial to you. There's two different numbers. There's a white crit cap, which is also known as the soft crit cap. Then there's the yellow crit cap, which is known as the hard crit cap. The reason why there's two is because of how the formula works. So he's got it listed here as the crit cap equals 100, which is 100%, minus miss, minus dodge, minus block, minus parry, minus glance, which is glancing blows, plus crit suppression. Now, if we go through this one by one, it'll make sense to you. So you can't crit if you miss, right? So you have to subtract out your miss rate. There's some of these formulas that do hit rate instead, where they add hit rate in. I don't like those formulas. I would rather do miss rate because of the heroic strike bug. And you'll see in a second. I've got a spreadsheet that I'll show. If the mob dodges, you can't crit them. So you have to subtract their dodge rate. So if your miss rate, let's say your miss rate is 10%, and then the mob can dodge you 5% of the time, your crit cap is already reduced down to 85%. Because it's, did I say 10? Yeah, 10% miss, 5% dodge, it's 15%. So already you're at 85%. You cannot crit 100% of the time. So you see, we're reducing the like, what is the realistic number you can actually crit? Block, I think this is in here for like other player, for PvP or something, because when a boss blocks you, it still counts as a hit, and it still counts as a crit. So if you hit a boss and the boss blocks, it can be a hit. You can also have a crit that is a block. It's just partial damage. So I'm not going to have block in my formula. Parry, all bosses, and I'm only talking about bosses as for this discussion. Non-bosses, level 62s, level 61s will have the numbers will be even better as far as your crit cap. Parry, all bosses have 14% chance to parry, and glance is 40%. And then you add in crit suppression. Crit suppression, for all intents and purposes, is 5% for bosses. Part of it is due to the level that they have over you, and the other part is due to let's go to critical strike. So there's two separate crit suppression deals going on. There's a 3%, and you guys can read it. I'm not going to read the website during this video, but there's 3% suppression when you're at 5 weapon skill, whichever every tank should be at least at 5. And then there's an additional 1.8%, I believe it is. Yeah, flat 1.8%. So that's 4.8%. And that is due to there's an innate suppression that is in the game due to crit chance gained from auras. And auras would be any gear that gives you crit that says adds 1% crit, or if you have a talent that adds crit. Any if you have any of that, it is reduced by that 1.8%. And there's been, and again, you can go and look, and he's done thousands of attacks against different level mobs to test these out. And there's all kinds of different test cases in here to prove it. So essentially what that means is, on your paper doll, when you log into the game and you hit the C button and it pulls up your character sheet, if it says you're at 40% crit, you're really not at 40% crit. That crit percentage, that crit percentage is showing your crit percentage not against bosses, so that it's reading 3% high, and it's also not reducing the 1.8. So it's basically showing 5% higher than it really will be in the game. And then obviously crit is RNG based, so it's also not factoring in the RNG nature of critical strike. So because you could have a 40% crit chance, go into a fight, and if the fight is only 30 seconds long and you only hit the mob 50 times or 60 times, you could get lucky and you could have a 50% crit rating or 60% crit rating. You can get unlucky and end up at 25%. So just because your character sheet says you're at 50% crit, that's really not what you're going to see. That's likely not what you're going to see when you're in game and you're fighting against the boss. So that's how you calculate the crit cap. Okay? So now I've got a spreadsheet that has the same information. I'm going to change this background to we'll change it to that so it looks a little bit better. So here's the formula right here. So total is 100%, and this is against the boss. I'm artificially putting my miss rate in at 5%. Let's just change it to 10. When you're dual wielding, your miss chance is, I believe it's 27%, and then of course if you have 305 weapon skill and you have got some hit rating from gear, that's going to change. It's probably going to be around 17 or 18% if you're at 9% hit dual wielding as Fury Prot. So let's just do that. Let's just say 18%. Dodge is 6.5%. Now this goes down. This does go down based on weapon skill. So if you're at 300 weapon skill, it's 6.5. So mobs have a 5% chance to dodge. They gain 0.5% for every level over you that they are. So a boss is level 63. But every 5 points of weapon skill will drop this down by half. So in reality, that's going to be 6%. If you have 310 weapon skill, which I think I have 311 because I'm a human, I have hunger and cold, then it goes down even more. It will go down to 5.5. Parry rate is 14%. That's just flat across the board for bosses. Your glancing blow, 40%. There's nothing you can do to reduce glancing blows. The only thing that you can do is increase the damage that you do. So they talk about glancing blows as well. There's a nice table in here that shows you at the delta of the defense skill. So I'm at so here's let's see, 305. So 15, it would be 10. Yeah. So if you're at 305 weapon skill, you wouldn't look at this row. You would actually look at this row because the delta would only be 10 points against the boss. So if you're at 0 weapon skill, so let's say you're at 300, you're a dwarf or a night elf or whatever, and you don't have edge masters or anything else that increases your weapon skill, your delta between your attack and the boss's defense is 15. Your glancing blow penalty, so when you glance, your white damage goes down by 35% for that hit. And then your hit cap is 9. When you add 5 weapon skills, so you go to 310 delta, you change that penalty from 35% down to 15, and now you've added 3% hit, and your requirement goes down to 6%. He doesn't have dodge as a column in here, but he talks about dodge down here. So I would be at I'm at 311. So I would be right here. So you can see it's not a huge difference. My glancing blow penalty. So this is why you see people say get to if you can get to 307 or 308 weapon skill, because right here, which this would be 307 weapon skill. Oh wait, no, it wouldn't. Sorry, this would be let's see, this would be 305, 6, 7. Yeah, this is 308 weapon skill right here. Your glancing blow penalty goes down to 5%, and that's the most you can reduce it by. So if your normal white hit is going to hit by, let's say your offhand is going to hit and it hits for 200, and then it glances, it's only going to take 5% off that 200. Whereas with 0 weapon skill, it takes 35% off. It's a huge difference. This is one of the reasons why weapon skill is a huge stat in Classic WoW. The other reason is because of the hit, but you can see the hit chance. That first 5 weapon skill grants you a ton of hit, and then after that it drops off a cliff. So if you're adding more weapon skill beyond 305, you're only doing it to take another 10% off of your weapon skill, your glancing blows, but also it does reduce your dodge, the dodge that the bosses have. Okay, so let's go back to the spreadsheet. So, and then suppression, we already talked about crit suppression, so you have to add that back in. So you're taking 100 minus this, minus this, minus this, minus this. Whatever that total is, then you add 5% back in. So you can see at 6% hit, so this is at 6% hit. Your crit cap for white hits is only 27%. So you can see the formula I did there. So it's this minus the sum of all of these, adding back in suppression. So 27% is not a lot. You can get that. You can get to 27% crit with world buffs. Like I'm pretty sure. Let me look at my pre-raid set. Fury Prot pre-raid. Oh, come on. What happened? Okay. Did it sign me out for some reason? I don't know why it would do that. Whatever. Fury Prot pre-raid. So I have talent selected. I don't have any buffs. And I'm at 17, basically 18%. So if you just do Dragon Slayer and Zandalar, let's see what that gets us. That's at 24. Very close. Very close to crit cap already. Now, the way the crit cap works, though, let me go back to the spreadsheet. So you might think that's I don't want to add any more crit because you can't get rid of suppression. You can't get rid of glances. You can't get rid of parries other than through RNG. So it just happens to be that the boss only parried you 5 times, over the course of a 3-minute fight. Or if you stand behind the boss. If you're tanking, that's not possible. If you're DPSing, that's one reason why it's important to stand behind mobs. That one of the reasons it's important to stand behind mobs whenever you can. You can't really reduce dodge. You can reduce it through weapon skill, but there's not a ton of items in the game that give you weapon skill. And even the ones that do, the highest you can go is 315. So you can only reduce dodge down to like 5.5%. So that's not gonna. The largest chunk that you can actually modify is this, and the only way to modify this is to add hit rating. This is the reason why you'll hear people say, like, if you're talking about rogues, this is one reason why rogues stack hit, and their gear has a lot of hit on it, because they need it. They don't have the Heroic Strike bug. For us, anytime you press the Heroic Strike button, this miss percentage goes to 0. So if I change this to 0, look at the crit cap over here is at 27%. Now let's change it to 0, 45%. So every time I'm Heroic Striking, my white crit cap is now 45%. So, and I've said this in other videos, if you can Heroic Strike, if you can keep it queued up 100% of the time or near 100% of the time, going beyond 6% hit is really not necessary. For trash mobs, you probably can and maybe should add more hit rating, but you should still be able to keep Heroic Strike going on trash mobs, especially when you hit certain levels of gear. And the other issue is this. When you hit Heroic Strike, it goes to 0. Heroic Strike goes off. Let's say Heroic Strike goes off and you only have 5 rage. Now you gotta let your white hits go. So then you miss a Heroic Strike Q. Now you're back at 18% miss. And then you let's say you missed 2 swings. Now you gotta wait and build more rage, and then you dodge the mob's attack. So you're basically bouncing from 0 to 18. So you're gonna go 0 when you're Heroic Strike, and then back to 18. As an average across the raid, you're going to see, if you go look at Warcraft logs, you're going to see maybe that your mischance was only 6 or 7 or 8%. But that doesn't mean that was 8% for the entire raid. So if you add 10% more hit, think, like, let's say you look at your average across the raid and you're like, oh, I missed 9% of my attacks during that entire ZG. If I get up to 10% hit, I'm good. That's not necessarily the case, because you have a higher chance to miss than that when you are unqueuing Heroic Strike or when you cannot queue it up. You're not sitting at 9% all the time. You're at 0 sometimes and 18 the other. So it's going to be kind of in between. What you want to do, or at least what I do, is you look at your boss fights. Look at your boss fights and see, what was your hit rating? What was your white? This is white hits. This is the soft cap. This is the hard cap. We'll talk about the hard cap in a second. If you are looking at a miss rate and you're at 15% on a boss fight, you are not queuing Heroic Strike enough. You either need to get better at doing that, or you need to look at your gear and figure out why are you rage starved. If you don't have world buffs, you're gonna be rage starved. You need to have world buffs as often as possible and consumables as often as possible. If you want to build a gear set around that, around not having world buffs and having a lot of hit rating instead, you could probably do that as well. But when I change that to 0 and the crit cap goes to 45, that's like end game gear. So your crit cap is, if you're a beginning player, you're really not going to hit that until you're probably you're probably not going to hit this until you're in some AQ40 gear. You're wearing 2.5 and some other stuff. World buffs can get you pretty close. But then let's talk about that too. So let's change this back to 18. Now we're going to talk about, this is the yellow crit cap, or the hard crit cap. And yellow attacks, if you're a human, you're at 6% hit, or if you're a non-human, you're at 9% hit, which you should be at all times. Your yellow attacks can never miss. So miss on these goes to 0. Dodge stays the same. Parry stays the same. Glance goes to 0 because yellow attacks cannot glance. And then crit suppression stays in because that's the same. So your hard crit cap, or another way to look at this is your crit cap for Heroic Strike, Bloodthirst, Revenge, Shield Slam if you're Prot, whatever. All your yellow attacks have this as a crit cap, which is, unless you're fighting Lothab, this is basically impossible to reach in the game. Now, I've said in other videos, there's really no such thing as a crit cap for warriors, and this is the reason why. Because even as Fury, even as a DPS warrior, you are casting Heroic Strike a lot. You're trying to keep it up as often as possible. So if you're keeping this at, let's say you're keeping this at 0% or close, let's say 5% as an average. So your white crit cap is 40 and your yellow crit cap is 85. Well, let's say in the game and on your character sheet it says you're at 50% crit or 52, or it's possible to get in that range. I think let's see. And this is Bisque gear basically. So this is yeah, so I've got all the potions. Let's change this. Crit stone. Double crit stones. Put on the squid. Roids. Juju power. Mongoose. I don't have leader of the pack, so if you had a feral, you could add another 3% crit. But this is kind of what you're normally going to see. DMF is 10% damage, doesn't impact your crit. And let's see, this is basically Nax Tank Bisc gear. This is... you could make a couple changes maybe. That's 26 agility. I was going to say maybe Shrouded Dominion, but that's one crit, and this is more than one crit. That's a crit there. 15 agility. You could maybe do double agility. But look, my crit rating is 53. So for 50, I'd say 55% is probably the highest you can get without fighting Lotheb or having some other kind of cheese mechanic going on that I'm just maybe not aware of. I do have Slayer's Crest on. Let's say we swap that out for Blackhand's Breath, which I wouldn't do because Slayer's is better. Now I'm at 55. That's crit. That's 1% crit. That's 1% crit. I don't think there's any rings that have 2% crit. Yeah, Boof is 1. Boof is basically Bis. 2% hit, 1% crit. Is there a belt that gives 2% crit? No. I don't think so. So 55%. And that's, you're not going to tank, there's only certain bosses you're going to tank with that set of gear. So then you're thinking, well, 15% of that is wasted, right? Because my white crit cap is only 40. So that extra 15% isn't doing anything for my white attacks, which is true. But your white attacks in this instance are only offhand attacks, which are not super strong to begin with. They're not, they are, but they're not as strong as your main hand. If your main hand is constantly swinging yellow, and then in between, because you're heroic striking, and then in between that you're casting Bloodthirst and Revenge, whenever Revenge procs, that's yellow as well, then you're only, in my eyes, I'm only at 55% of 85. The real number I'm trying to hit is 85 because I want my Bloodthirst to crit as often as possible. I want my Heroic Strike to crit as often as possible. I do want my offhand to crit, but I don't look at it as wasted crit because you're Heroic Striking all the time anyway. The other thing is, what are you going to change out to drop that crit? Like you can change Blackhand's Breath out for Slayers or DFT and get more. The only thing you would change it out for is attack power. There's no other stat to go for. You're not going to add more hit rating. And you're not going to add more hit rating because we already talked about the Heroic Strike bug. The hit rating is going to be wasted the higher level gear that you're in. So if you're, and again, this is not talking about like a ZG tank or a MC tank, but when you get towards the end game, and you need to keep that in mind too, you're probably going to gear a little bit differently as you get better and better gear. But like chromatic boots, these are best boots in the game. They've got hit on them. There's really like, and they have 40 attack power in the form of strength, which goes up more than 40. But like these are 44, but these are leather. You're not going to tank in that. Fallen Hero, that's 40. That's or 20 strength. That's 40 attack power. Like, so you can't change any boots out. You could change maybe the ring. You could change out this ring, but then you're going to gain a hit, and you don't need any more hit. You could put Boof on, which is 52 attack power. That's actually a really good ring, but it doesn't have stamina on it. So you're not going to wear that for every single engagement. You're not going to wear this on Patchwork or Lotheb or Saffron or Kel'Thuzad. You're probably going to wear something with some stamina on it. But there's really no other options. 99% of the time, when an item has crit on it, it already has attack power on it. There's really nothing that's just flat out attack power with no crit. Dragon Slayers is probably one of the only rings in the game I can think of that has attack power and hit and no crit. But even then, I would rather have the crit than the hit, for sure. I'll just leave that on there. Like bracers, same thing. Like this has 15 strength, so that's 30 attack power. These have 24 strength, so they're very, very. Actually, these are better. So that's 48. That's 48 attack power unbuffed, and they have a crit on them. This has hit. You don't want the hit. So like there's no option. It's like adding stamina. It's like saying I'm gonna go add a bunch of stamina, but not defense. That gear doesn't exist. You can't add that. I can't put on a piece of gear that has 50 stamina on it, or 43 stamina like Dreadnought breastplate without adding defense. So The only thing you can do is keep your hit chance as low as possible, around 6%. Like if you're at 8%, 7%, even if you're at 9%, it's not the end of the world. But that hit rating gets, another way to think about it is that hit rating gets wasted as well. So if you're worried about, oh, I'm wasting 15% crit here, well, every time you press heroic strike, you're wasting 3% hit. So you're wasting one or the other, and at least the crit is useful here on all your yellow attacks, which you're doing. You're casting a yellow attack every single swing when you're tanking. You're heroic striking every swing, and then in between there, like I said, you're doing revenge, you're doing bloodthirst. So here's just some stats I pulled from Warcraft logs. This is a few weeks ago, one of the raids that I did. I pulled one where I kept world buffs. I'm not wearing the same exact gear for every fight. Thaddeus, for example, my crit chance goes down quite a bit because I wear 4-piece tier 3 and I wear some other things. Patchwork, obviously, my crit rating goes down. I put on a lot of mitigation for patchwork. But I also have trash fights. Excuse me, and then the entire raid from that week. Excuse me. So, one thing that is consistent, though, every single one of these fights, I only had 6% hit. I did not have more than 6% hit on any of these fights. So let's look at, and then I have the time, how long each fight lasted. So Gluth was 47 seconds for that week. Here's my number of casts for each ability. So you can see in melee is the number one cast, but it wasn't the number one damage dealer for that fight, but I didn't include damage here. So heroic strike, I've got the numbers, and then I have the percentages. So we can just look at the percentages. But I've got parry. I got unlucky a little bit here. I got about almost 5% extra parry. It should have been 14 and it was at 18. But again, when you're looking at, this is a very small data set, 32 casts. And then you go look at Meiji and you see like, some of his test examples. He did 4,000 attacks, 1,000 attacks, 2,000 attacks, 2,000 attacks, 2,000 attacks. All these are in the thousands. The percentages are going to get more accurate over a longer period and a larger sample. These are extremely small sample sizes. Even over the entire raid, I only cast 1,700 melee attacks, almost 1,800. So the percentages are not going to line up exactly, how they should. Same thing with crit. Look at my crit. My bloodthirst crit was about that. This is about what I would expect. It's close to 40%, and heroic strike, for whatever reason, I was super unlucky, and even my melee was right around there, close to 37. My heroic strike was, for whatever reason, it was 28% instead of being closer to 40. Part of it was probably because of the parries. Because look, bloodthirst didn't get parried at all. I only cast 8 of them because of the cooldown. But 0 misses, 0 glances. That's always going to be 0. Dodge also was higher than it should have been. It should be around 6%, and my dodges for both were higher than they should be. On my melee, it was a little bit lower. But look at my miss percentage on melee. I only missed 1 attack. So out of 41, I missed 1. That puts my miss rating at 2.4. My regular hit percentage was 10%. My crit was just about 40. I mean, pretty close, 37, almost 37. Glance was 34. So if you take this formula and you plug these numbers in for that fight, my white crit cap was actually 51% based on what actually happened. And obviously, I did not have the full 51%, or RNG screwed me over, which I think RNG kind of screwed me over there. Patchwork, this fight is a lot more mitigation. You could see that my crit chance, if we average these out, let me move this. So my average crit chance for all my abilities and melee there, and I didn't put revenge in here because it's kind of RNG in nature anyway. 26% versus my average crit there was 34. So that's probably about what I would expect. I would expect to have about 10 or 10 or 12 or 15% less crit on Patchwork with the gear that I wear. But I'm mostly wanting to look at this to see the melee miss rate, the white miss rate. So Heroic Strike regular hit, the crits. I got a couple dodges. I didn't have any parries. You see there's 0 parries because on Patchwork, and that's another way that you can kind of artificially, I don't want to say artificially, but oh, that's just because of because the dodge was lower than 6% is why that's showing up like that. It is possible as a main tank to position yourself in such a way that Patchwork cannot parry you. Because, and you want to do that. I think I've shown that in another video. Because when you take these off the table, all he can do then is dodge. Because you're never going to miss a yellow attack. His dodge rate is much lower than his parry rate. And they combine. So it's not one or the other. So if you can take that 14% off the table, it'll increase your threat and your damage by a lot. Let's look at my white attacks. Now this is a higher number than I would expect. So I probably, because I know for a fact on Patchwork as a main tank, I am not ever, even if I dodge multiple times in a row, he attacks so fast that I'm never rage starved. So I missed 6 attacks, and that this would trigger me to go back and look at the VOD, which I think it's expired at this point, to see what was I doing. Was I activating a trinket? Was I moving? Was I demo shouting? Was I, what was I doing during those 6 misses where I missed? Those are basically 6 missed Heroic Strike Qs where a white attack went through instead on my main hand. And then obviously they missed. And then because when Heroic Strike is queued, your offhand cannot miss. But you could see my crit percentage was higher than my regular hit percentage because I'm basically pushing that regular hit off the table. And then my glance was right about what it should be, right about 40%. Fairlena, here's another short. And Patchwork is a little bit longer. It's still not a large sample size, but it is a little bit longer of a fight. Fairlena, 30 seconds, roughly 33 seconds. My crit, I got a little bit higher crit rating here with Heroic Strike than I did before on Gluth, but then my Bloodthirst, because the fight is so short, Bloodthirst is a 6-second cooldown, so I can only cast 5 of them. Well, just one of them got parried, and then only one of them crit out of the 4 that landed, only 1 crit, when it probably should have been 2. But that's such a small sample size that it's going to skew your numbers, right? But let's look at my melee. I only missed 2, so again, I'd want to go back and see. That's probably when I was pulling her into position, right at the beginning of the fight. Maybe I didn't have Rogue Strike queued up as I was running in, something like that. Missed 2 white attacks for 6%, but then my regular white hits were only 3% because of your regular hits can only be so crit, glance, miss, and parry add up to 96.67%. So the only thing that was even left to do would be a regular hit. And that probably would have been close to 0 because on Fairlena, I do wear a lot of DPS gear. And my crit rating was probably, on my character sheet, my crit rating was probably in the high 40s. So this probably would have, if I hadn't missed those cues and had a few regular hits in there, that probably would have been close to 43 or 44% crit rating. Thaddeus, this is a little bit longer fight as well. I'm right at 2 minutes. This is pretty close to what you would expect, which is kind of surprising. And then my crit and my regular hit. So even looking at this, 40% Heroic Strike crits. Like, I'd rather have that 50 or 60 if I could. Like, I would, if I could push my crit rating up higher through gear, I would. Bloodthirsts, pretty even, about 50-50. Um, and Thaddeus is all about luck. There's some times that I'm tanking him. We do a taunt rotation, but there's times that I've fought him where I'm always on the opposing polarity side, which is, it doesn't happen very often. But Thaddeus is always facing, I mean, this is obvious, but he's always facing one way or the other. Depends on what polarity the other tanks got, because we have 4 tanks that do a four taunt rotation to keep him off the mages, because Ignite does stupid damage on Thaddeus. And there's times that I've gone back and looked at my logs where I had like 2 parries for the entire fight, and I looked at the VOD, and it was because I just happened to be on the other side of polarity from the other tanks, and they were taunting, so their taunt time obviously would be higher than mine by myself, and I was always by myself on the opposing polarity side. Every time their polarity switched, mine did too, so we swapped sides. So whenever I taunted him, he just did happen to not parry me. So you can get really lucky with Thaddeus. You can also get really unlucky, and as a tank, and he could, you could have almost 0 parries. You could have a ton. But again, looking at the melee, my melee miss percentage, my white miss percentage was only 4% when it should be closer to 18. And that's because of the heroic strike bug. And then my white crit was 30, right at 32. And then my glance was a little bit higher than it should have been. I just, again, just a little unlucky. Here's the trash fights. I don't remember. This entire raid was an hour and a half, so this is probably 45 minutes worth of trash, I'm going to guess. Heroic Strike, Bloodthirst, they're 35% and 40% for crit, even though those should be very similar to each other, because it looks like the dodge and the parry are very similar to each other. It's just RNG. I just had a few extra percentages for Bloodthirst, and also there's a lot more heroic strikes being cast, right? So again, it kind of goes back to like sample size. But then like you look here, and this crit is lower than I would expect. So I would expect it to be closer to 40, but the parry rate went up as compared to just on trash. This is for the entire raid. This is trash and bosses. Bloodthirst is, same thing. It's a little bit lower than I would expect. Dodge and parry, and when you're looking at the trash in the entire raid, you don't forget you're including level 62s and 63s in there. So for the entire raid, my white miss rate, even on, let's just look at trash, was 9%. So again, that's where I was saying before, if you look at that and you say, well, I just need to add 10% hit and I'm good. That's not necessarily the case, because you're going from 0 to 18, 0 to 18, 0 to 18. Every time you're queuing Heroic Strike and then it goes off, until you press it again, you're back at 8. You're never in between that. You're never sometimes at 12% miss and then now you're at 0 or whatever. It's always 0 or 18 if you're at 6% hit. So what this tells me is I need to get 9% better at queuing Heroic Strike up and making sure that it stays up as often as possible. I would want this number to be, because the more you take these out, in theory, the higher your crit percentage is going to go up, because that's how you increase it over here, if you remember, is taking the misses out, the miss percentages out. And I know my crit rating, and again, there's another thing you need to think about too. This was an hour and a half long raid. Songflower doesn't last for an hour and a half. It only lasts for an hour. If you miss any of your consumables, like if Mongoose falls off and you don't realize it for 20 minutes, you didn't have that extra crit for those 20 minutes. Ren falls off, which I don't think Ren gives you crit. What else? Something else falls off after an hour. And then you got to consider your gear. You're not wearing the same gear the entire raid either. If you wanted to look at an MC or a BWL, I didn't pull a BWL for this, but I could probably do that in a separate video. I do wear pretty much the same gear other than Fire Maw on every boss. But this is about what I usually see. I usually see my white melee miss rate anywhere between 6 and 9% for an entire raid. But again, I don't really care that much because I want my crit. I don't want to sacrifice crit for hit. I would rather get better at the heroic strike queuing, and one of the ways that I've done that, or that I've, because I've been doing this for a while, analyzing what happened, what it, why am I seeing more misses or less crits than I should be. One thing that I've done is to add heroic strike into other abilities. So because if you have a super fast main hand like the Warblades of the Hikari or daggers or Hungering Cold, which I think is 1.5 speed or 1.6, one of those two. If you have a super fast main hand, you have to press heroic strike a bunch. Like, you gotta slam that button all raid long, and if you even for a second miss it, and that's why some warriors you'll see some warriors recommend mapping heroic strike to mouse wheel, because then you can just roll your finger down on the mouse wheel and just keep doing it the whole raid. I don't do that for a few reasons. One is because I'm already used to the way that I do it now, and I don't want to change it. And two is that I have a mouse that's a multi-button mouse, and I have multiple abilities macroed or mapped to my mouse. So I have tab targeting on my mouse. I have auto run on my mouse. I have Hellstones on my mouse. I have my mount, which doesn't matter in a raid. What else? There's one or two. I've got like 5 or 6 abilities that are mapped to my mouse, and I move a lot. I focus and pay a lot of attention to my positioning, and I don't want to have my pointer finger dedicated to rolling the mouse wheel to keep heroic strike going. So instead, what I do is I have a dedicated button, a keybind for heroic strike, and then I also keybind it into revenge. So with that, and usually I'm pressing that, and the only time I'm not pressing that is when Bloodthirst is about to come off cooldown, because revenge does eat a global cooldown, and if it procs right when Bloodthirst does, you could be waiting an extra global cooldown. But while it's on cooldown, I'm slamming that revenge button, because if revenge does come up, you want it to go off, because it's really good threat for only 5 rage. So what I essentially do there is just macro revenge and heroic strike together. I also macro battle shout and heroic strike together, and I also recently macro demo shout and heroic strike together. So anytime I'm refreshing demo shout, I'm also heroic striking in between there, because sometimes demo shout resists, and sometimes it resists multiple times in a row, and you don't want to get caught refreshing it every 3 global cooldowns or 4 global cooldowns or whatever, and then if you're not pressing the heroic strike key at the same time, so you're basically pressing 2 separate keybinds together, you're going to be missing out on those cues. But if you macro them together, and you can macro heroic strike to any ability, because it's not an active ability, it's on next swing, it doesn't eat up a global cooldown. So that's one way you can set it up. I find that I used to over prioritize heroic strike, and it would cause me to miss Bloodthirst cooldowns. And on trash especially, I try to open with Bloodthirst and then start doing heroic strike. So I almost always have a few swings at the beginning of a trash fight where I don't have heroic strike queued up, unless I'm carrying over 50 or 60 rage from a previous pack. If I've only got 30 rage, which is what Bloodthirst costs, I'm not going to queue up heroic strike running into that pack. I'm going to run in, I'm going to taunt, I'm going to Bloodthirst, then I'm going to wait a tick or two to start getting rage, and then I'm going to start heroic striking. So, you're probably never going to be able to negate, especially on trash fights. You're probably never going to be able to negate, anything lower than maybe 5% misses. But again, I don't think I would add 5% more hit. I wouldn't go from 6% to 11% hit, because when you're missing, you're not missing. This 9% is not what I'm missing. I'm actually missing 18% of the time for a few seconds, and then I'm going back to 0. Then I'm going to 18% for a few seconds while I'm waiting on rage to build up. Then I'm going back to 0. So really adding that hit is not going to do anything for you, in my opinion. I would rather add attack power and crit. And again, the reasons why are because when your offhand hits, when you're hitting heroic strike, and your offhand hits hard through crit and attack power, that means you're now getting rage to do the next heroic strike. So that's another reason why warriors scale so well, is because the harder you hit, and harder could be attack power and harder could be crit. The harder you hit, the more rage you get, the more rage you can spend, the harder you hit. So like your wide attacks, it's not necessarily true for wide, like you can't really spend rage to make wide attacks hit harder, but your wide attacks are benefiting from the same gear and the same buffs that you're using to buff the rest of your attacks. Excuse me. And the harder you're hitting, the more threat you're generating. The bigger lead you're going to generate. And the bigger lead that you can generate, then you can like start paying more attention to environment or putting on a shield or using your cooldowns a little bit better. And really that, like I said, I think that's all done through increasing your critical strike chance and your attack, which those two go hand in hand, like we talked about before. There's really no gear you can put on that's just going to give you heaps of attack power but no crit, or heaps of crit but no attack power. Usually you're making a choice between crit or hit, or attack power or hit. And usually you're never making a choice between attack power and crit. Maybe on the consumable side, but even then, like on the consumable side, like because even the attack power consumables like Juju power, they stack with Mongoose, so you're getting the best of both worlds there. You're picking Roid, so the Roids would be maybe one exception where you can either pick attack power, or you can pick agility, or you can pick stamina. So you can pick Roids, or you can pick Scorpok, which is 25 edge, which is a little bit more than 1% crit. So here you can make a choice: 1% crit or 25 attack power, 25 strength, which is 50 attack power. I usually pick the 50 attack power, but I have both in my bags at all times. I keep this in my bags, I keep Roids in my bags, and then I keep a Spirit of Zanza, because those three will not stack together. So if I die and lose my buffs, then I had Roids on, then maybe I'll use a Spirit of Zanza to buff my hit points back up a little bit, because I just lost all my buffs. Or if I know that, and usually when you lose if I'm a tank and I lose my buffs, I'm probably not tanking any more bosses that night, unless all the other tanks lose their buffs. If I am, then I would probably use the agility, because that would be the next best thing for threat. So anyway, and this kind of ties, in with the other stats like weapon skill. We talked about weapon skill. We talked about hit rating. There's really, it all kind of goes together, but just like weapon skill, you don't want to go beyond a certain, you don't want to go beyond 308. 308, which was right here. I think it was 308 plus 7 is 15, right? You don't want to go beyond this, because the benefits for doing so are extremely small. I think that that's the same argument for going beyond 6% hit. The benefits are extremely small. Unless you're, the only exceptions I would say to that would be is if you're at low levels of gear, and for whatever reason you can't or won't get world buffs. And if that's the case, then yes, I would probably add more hit rating, because you're going to be rage starved. You're going to be really rage. Like if you're wearing, let's go to the pre-BWL gear. So even this is a decent amount of crit, but still 26%, 27%, and that's with no buffs on. Once I did this in a previous video, you add up all the buffs and it gets like up to 40%. But if you're like, I don't need buffs, I've got some epics, I'm gonna go tank MC, whatever. You're gonna do a whole lot less threat, sorry. You're going to be rage starved. Like 26% crit, 900 attack power. That's really not anything. I mean, this is pretty good gear. I mean, this is some pretty great rings, and there's a couple BIS items in here. But you're from experience, I'm going to tell you, you're going to be rage starved. Even if you take this and this, if you had a character like this, took it into ZG or took it into AQ20, you're going to be rage starved. You're not going to be heroic striking nearly as much as you should be because you're rage starved. And you're going to be missing attacks left and right. And then you're going to go look at your logs and you're going to say, oh, he's full of shit. Well, all these numbers that I'm showing you, it's not really possible to hit 40% crit or 50% crit without getting world buffs. It's not. I mean, whoops. So this is like, let's see, Lionheart. Okay, no one's gonna tank with Lionheart, but actually, you know what? I think I already did this. Hold on. Swap back to Endless Rage. I think that's why I created this one. Trash MT. So Lionheart, Storm Rage. We're just trying to get as much crit as humanly possible without world buffs. Let's see what we can get. I'm not going to put leather on. I'll just leave that there. Shrouded Dominion. Actually, I think you get more crit out of Fallen God. Yeah, you do. And we're not going to get buff. It's still better even without buffs. It's not better for attack power without buffs. But it's better for crit. We're trying to see how much crit we can get. Plated A-Bomb is a crit. I don't think you'd wear GST as a tank. That would be another percent crit, but let's just leave it there. Crit there. Let's say we're going to do 15 Agi. That's over a percent crit there. Annihilation, 15 Agi. Let's change this to Agi, even though it's only 3. Really piss poor cloak enchant, if you ask me. Onslaught, they're all 1%. Carnage is 2%. There are no crit boots. These just have Agi on them. QSR, this is 1 Agi, and I don't think, yeah, Boof doesn't have any more Agi. Let's say Black Hand's Breath. Kiss the Spiders, 1 crit. Slave Maker's 1 crit, and then, so with world buffs, we're at 54. Let's say, raid buffs, but not world buffs. And not consumables. Let's say this dude is going to go tank an AQ20 for some people. Yeah, 35% crit in the best gear in the game, with Thunder Fury, with Hungering Cold, gear from Nax, gear from AQ40, and using Black Hand's Breath to artificially inflate your crit. If we took Black Hand's Breath off and said, nah, we're going to roll with DFT and really show off, now you're at 33% crit. This dude is probably going to not be rage starved as much, but I would say it's still going to be noticeable. When you have world buffs and you're at 50% crit or close to it or over it, you notice a humongous difference in your rage generation. Like it is night and day different. So, and this is one and I used to worry about this all the time. Like I used to worry about the crit cap when I was in BWL gear, getting ready to go to I hadn't even gone to AQ40 yet. I was in BWL gear. I had ZG swords. I had Drake Talon pauldrons. I had I didn't have Endless Rage helmet. I don't remember what I think I had Helmet Domination. Like I had the BWL gear, and I would go get world buffs. I would get the head and the heart, and then I would put dent stones on my weapons because I'm like, well, I'm already at the crit cap. Like, I don't need to put crit stones on. For one, they're expensive, and for two, I'm already at the crit cap. Why do I need to do that? And then we would get done with a raid, and I would go back and look at logs, and I would see the other tanks would just be, my crit would be at like 25%, and theirs would be at 35%. And I'd be like, what in the hell is going on? Like, we're all in relatively the same gear. And it's, it's because your yellow attacks make up so much. They don't, most of the time as a warrior, you're going to see your white damage up there. But you're only going to have your offhand swinging. That's pretty much going to be it. Your main hand is going to swing maybe 20 times a raid or 30 times. However many times you miss heroic strike Q, that's how often your main hand is going to hit white. And when it's not hitting white, it basically does not have a crit cap. Because you can't hit 85%. We just showed that. It's not possible. The only way you can get this high is on Lotheb with the buff from the Spore. But that's a totally separate discussion and a totally separate strategy. So, in my opinion, for all intents and purposes, there is no crit cap for warriors. You should not worry about it. The only time you should ever worry about it is on Lotheb. And you should be trying to get as much crit as humanly possible through consumables, world buffs, gear. If there's a piece of gear that has hit on it, I'm trying to think of a piece. Like Barb Choker and Storm Rages, I know that there's people that are like, I'd rather have a hit from, Presters. I want to get Presters because that's also got one crit. It's got 30 agi. It's one crit. Like, yeah, that's true. But you don't need that hit rating. What do you have the hit rating for? You don't need that much hit rating. You only need 6%. So the Storm Rages has 2%, and it has attack power. Presters doesn't give you any attack power as a warrior. Barb Choker is a very good neck for DPS and for Fury Prot. The stamina is not great. The stamina is not great on either one. But you could put these in a set that includes 2-piece of tier 3, for an example, that then makes up some of that stamina. You want crit You want as much crit and as much attack power as humanly possible. Stay around 6% hit. Every one of my sets, here's one of my patchworks. I don't have every piece of this gear, but here's one of my patchwork sets. It's only at 17%. I don't think I have the buffs. Yeah, I don't have the buffs. But that's like half the amount of crit that I have in my other sets of gear. But I'm putting all this crap on because I need the stamina and the defense. This is for main tanking. Because I need the stamina and the defense for tanking him and I know that this set can keep enough threat. But like, let's look at is it this one? Yeah, this one's just swapped out a couple rings. This is what I normally wear. Well, this has buffs. I normally don't do that. I normally do dense. I usually only roll double sharpening or double elemental if I lose my buffs. And that's right about 50. Yeah, that's about right. It's right about 50. I don't have boof, so let's swap that out for quick strike, which is still percent to crit. I don't have Kiss of the Spider yet. So that's 52. Is this right? Chromatics, yeah. Yeah, I don't have these, which is only hit. Plated A-Bomb. I don't have this yet. I have Scourge. I don't have Storm Rages. I have Sadists. Yeah, that's about right. So this is the gear that I normally wear in Nax to tank the few of the caster bosses and all the trash. And I'm at 50% crit. So I'm pretty close to what's possible in the game. I'm about 5% short of a full-blown crit build. But I'm at 6% hit, and I don't ever go above that. And I'm at 2200 attack power with all my world buffs and raid buffs. I wish this would show your weapon DPS, but it doesn't. But if I had to pit, and like I said, you can't really increase attack power without increasing crit and vice versa. But there, you do usually sacrifice one of these two in order to add more hit. So like if I wanted to add, let's say I got DFT. I mean, DFT is probably a terrible example because it's a lot better than Black Hand's Breath, but it doesn't have any crit on it. But I do gain more attack power. So I'd go to 8% hit, and then this would probably actually be a decent upgrade. But then, let's see, 56 attack power. DFT is probably really close to Kiss of the Spider. I mean, I would rather use Kiss because of the on use, and it's not going to reflect here. Let's pick a different. Let's do Quick Strike Ring versus. So Boof's going to give me a hit. So this is going to be something I got to think about at some point. Quick Strike Ring and Circle of Applied Force. Quick Strike Ring unbuffed is, and I'm saying unbuffed because ZG gives you more 15% more stats. Kings give you 10% more stats. So anytime you see raw strength, like 5 strength, you're like, oh, that's 10 attack power. Well, raid buffed, it's more than that. It's like 12.5 or 13 or whatever. Applied Force is 24 AP, but it's also 1%. So it's 9 stamina, 1% crit, 24 attack power. This is 8 stamina, 1% crit, and 40 attack power. So these two rings are very similar to each other. QSR, I think, is Applied Force, I think, is better world buffed, and QSR is better not world buffed, but they're very, very, very close. Boof is, so compared to QSR, is 12 more attack power. If I don't factor buffs in, and it's the same crit, and it's 1 hit. So the hit, and I lose stamina. I lose 8 stamina, which is not anything to write home about. But when I'm looking at this on paper, and when you're looking at these things on paper, like, should I spend points on this, or should I let the Fury Warriors get it, and then I'll just get it later? Like, I never have rolled on Boof, and I don't plan to. Like, it's just, what am I gaining out of that? I'm really not gaining. I'm gaining a percent to hit that I don't need. I would rather have DFT because I don't have Kiss yet. Even when I get Kiss, I want DFT because DFT is just that good of a trinket for Fury Prot. It's just super good. Slayers is super good as well. Slayers and DFT and Kiss is, so right now what I do is I have Market a Champion, which only works on undead and demons, which in Nax there's quite a bit, but not a Spiderwing doesn't have a lot of undead or demons. The other wings do. So this is what my setup normally looks like. Is I would have Slayers here, and then I have Black Hand's Breath here, and then whenever I'm fighting undead or demons, Black Hand's Breath gets swapped out. Once I get Kiss and DFT, I'm going to just bank Black Hand's Breath and get rid of it, because I'm not going to need like that extra crit. So Kiss is 1 hit, 1 crit, but it's also 20% attack speed every 2 minutes, and that is huge. And then DFT has the hit, but it has dodge and attack power, and then Slayers is just good. It's just a lot of attack power. So whenever Slayers is on cooldown, I'll swap in DFT, or whenever Kiss is on cooldown, whatever the case may be, and then I'll swap out the undead trinket for it. But having this kind of information is what will help you make gear choices. Also, I know we talked about gear choices in some of the other videos, but like same thing with sadists. Like when Storm Rages drops, I'm gonna cut the stamina in half, which it's only 12, but you cut out 12 stamina here, 10 stamina here, 5 stamina here. You go across your entire set throwing on DPS pieces of gear. All of a sudden you're missing 800 hit points. That's how that happens. And then you die in military on a trash pool and you wonder why. But I'm gaining a 6 attack power, a little tiny bit of attack power, and another % crit. Which another % crit is not bad. Like I said, you want to be trying to get as much crit as humanly possible. I will get Storm Rages eventually, but it's not on my priority list. Like I am not, like, right now what I want is Cloak of the Fallen God. I'm trying to prioritize this because Cloak of the Scourge has attack power, but it doesn't have crit. And it has really good stamina, but Cloak of the Fallen God's 15 and this is 23. I mean, it is 10, and I just said you don't want to lose 10 here, 10 there, 10 whatever. But Cloak of the Scourge is more of it's more leaning towards a mitigation cloak, and Cloak of the Fallen God is what I would want more for trash. Where right now I wear Cloak of the Scourge. Unless I'm fighting a mitigation fight, Cloak of the Scourge is what I wear. So like, yeah, I want to get Cloak of the Fallen God. I don't want to get Shrouded Dominion. That's more of a DPS cloak. Eventually I'll get it, but I'd rather have Fallen God for Fury Prot. And then, like I said, the trinkets. Like, my trinkets are my weakest spot right now. So when you're gearing your warrior up, like, that's what you need to kind of plan around. What's the next sets of gear that are available to me in the next tier? So if I'm in BWL moving to AQ40, you know, is my cloak from ZG still, or do I need to upgrade my cloak? What kind of upgrade is it? What stats am I adding? What stats am I taking away? If you have a DFT and you're at 9% hit, I'd say start dropping hit off other pieces of gear. You know, don't throw them in the garbage. You know, I'm not going to throw Sadists in the garbage when I get a different neck, and I'm not going to throw this cloak in the garbage when I get Fallen God. And when it's going to go in my bank, it's probably going to sit in my bags for a little while before I've determined whether or not it needs to stay in my bags. But then it's going to go in the bank. I'm not going to throw it away because I might need it at some point for some other set that I come up with that needs some more hit rating. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. Again, these are my opinions. You know, I used to spend a ton of time and energy worrying about being over the crit cap and trying to stay under it, and, you know, trying to be in that sweet spot of 35 to 40%. And like I said, this only matters on paper. These numbers are not what actually happens during fights. So the glance rating is supposed to be 40, but it might not. It might only be 30. If you're fighting a mob, like, I mean, we can find an example, like, excuse me, right here. On Gluth, of course, it was only 47 seconds long, but look at that. My glance went down to 34, and then my parry was, so I'm missing 2% here, and I'm missing 6%, so that's 8%. That pretty much is where that hit came from, was that 8% that's missing. Otherwise, every single swing that wasn't a glance would have been a critical strike. So, in theory, my crit cap here, instead of being 40, was 51. Oh, and the dodges too. Dodges was lower than what I have listed here. I have 6%, and it was only 4.8. So, you know, this is all theoretical bullshit. You know, like, we're talking about RNG. We're talking about, you know, this is what's probably going to happen. And like I said, Patchwork, 0 parries. So I completely took 14%. So on Patchwork, which I don't wear DPS gear on Patchwork. I showed you one of my sets already. In theory, though, on Patchwork, I could wear about 46% on this fight anyway. I could have worn 46% gear that gave me 46% crit and buffs, and I would have been like right at the crit cap. So there's really no crit cap on Patchwork for me. But again, it doesn't matter because I don't wear, like, that's not the gear that I'm trying to wear on Patchwork. Now as a DPS, you can use all these same principles. Obviously, as a DPS, you would take parry out. You would leave in dot. So as a DPS, it would look like this. So you still have miss. Of course, this depends on your heroic strike queuing as a DPS. As a DPS, you require even higher levels of gear in order to queue heroic strike nonstop. You're probably not going to see, you know, you need to be world buffed. Like, you need to be world buffed. That's not even a question as a DPS if you want to queue heroic strike 100% of the time. But let's say, like, yeah, you stick around like 9% or whatever. Dodge is 6%, parry 0, glance 40, suppression. Your crit cap is 50, but I would ignore that. I would say you don't have a crit cap, and even then, that 50 is going to be hard to hit. You're going to have to be basically in BIS gear to hit the crit cap. So don't worry about the crit cap. Like, you need crit, as much crit as you can possibly get. If you're a DPS, double crit stones. Don't use dense. I use dense for a bunch of other reasons that have nothing to do with the crit cap. As a tank. As DPS, I use double crit, and if I lose world buffs, I use double crit. Yellow crit cap, other than on Lotheb, like I said, it's not even in the realm of possibility. It's not possible for you to get that high. So the main takeaway, I think, is you need to be focused on your hit rating and keep your hit rating. You know, like I said, DFT is an amazing trinket, but I wouldn't look at Black Hand's Breath and go, well, that's 2% crit, and that video told me to have my crit as high as possible. Like, I would take a DFT, and then, you know, you really can't drop crit anywhere. Like I said, it's very hard to drop crit. But like then maybe you go, okay, now I do want Storm Rages because I want to make up that extra crit that I lost. Or you know, I want a cloak that has crit on it. So I got Cloak of the Scourge that has hit. Now I want to go back and do. There's really no other cloaks that have crit on them. I thought there was a cloak off of one of the dragons that had crit on it, but it must suck if it's way down here somewhere. Yeah, Cloak of Fire Maul's attack power. Because even one of these, even the Cloak of Draconic Might, that's almost 1% crit. 16 agility is almost 1% crit. So technically, if you're hit capped, this is better than Cloak of the Scourge. Because it's the same. This is 16 strength. That's 32 attack power. This only has 30 on it, and it doesn't scale with buffs. The only big difference between the two would be the stamina. So if you've got this in your bags and then you get DFT, then like maybe start wearing this, especially on trash. Because it's going to be more crit and attack power than Cloak of the Scourges, even though this drops in BWL. That's why Cloak of the Fallen God is so good, because it scales with world buffs, but it gives you a little bit of everything. And you usually don't need to hit when you got this. When you're able to get this cloak, you usually don't need to hit anymore because you're wearing 2.5 and you know you got other pieces of gear. Excuse me. All right. Well, hopefully that was helpful to some of you guys. If anybody has any questions or comments, like I said, I will put these links. There's a lot of stuff to read in here. This is very old, but it's still out there. I've thought about reaching out to some, because if you come down the list, somewhere down here. Did he finish it? I thought he didn't finish it. I thought at one point this wasn't finished. Maybe it is finished. Okay. I don't know why I thought that. I thought some of these were gone. Yeah, this goes into a lot. This is more. When we go back to the introduction, this is Fury Warrior. Meiji is more around just the actual mechanics of the game. These are not Fury Prot guides, but we're taking the information out of them and coming up with a Fury Prot guide, essentially. But I'll link these in the description. There are some great Fury Prot guides out there. This is one of them. I'll link this one as well. This is a tank on. He still plays. He took a break for a while, but he's back to playing. This is I will say this is a little outdated. And outdated, just meaning that there's some of these sets that I have kind of modified to, for myself. He does link in some of these the Fight Club stuff, which is great to have the Fight Club stuff. Here's a sim here. Here's a tank sim. I've used this before. That does a threat analysis. You fill in all your gear, and it basically tells you how much threat per second you can put out. Very handy. But the dude who wrote this guide is very knowledgeable and helped me a ton. He talks about consumables, full list of consumables, what you should be using, which ones are shared, macros, what spec, your rotation, different levels of tanking. It's a very good guide. It's a very good read. It doesn't go super in depth and doesn't have like a ton of formulas. It's very easy to read and understand. And he's a very good tank. He's in one of the best guilds on Alliance side. And I think he's also played Horde, or still does play Horde. So I'll link all of these as well. But all of this information together is kind of what got me to the point that I am today, and the understanding and the opinions that I have today. Especially around like the crit cap and whether or not it's important, and hit rating, and whether or not you should have more hit, more than the hit cap. Agility, and I put a video out about agility, and is agility underrated, and do people not look at agility the right way for Fury Prot? And in my opinion, they don't. In my opinion, people focus a little too much on mitigation and stamina, and then when they do focus on the threat portion of Fury Prot, they focus on the wrong stats. I see There's a lot of tanks I see that focus on hit rating way too much, and I don't necessarily understand why, but you know, in my opinion, it should be attack power and critical strike rating. And you know, crit rating is there's probably a formula out there that says how much attack power is worth a crit. I don't know what that number is, but like I said, you don't really need to know because there's not a lot of gear that makes you make that choice between one or the other. A lot of times those two come with each other. You're 99% of the time you're making a choice between hit and attack power or crit and attack power. So you're basically making the choice between hit or crit. A few things have crit and hit on them and no attack power. Kiss of the Spider is one great example. But usually you're not making that type of decision. You're making the decision between hit and crit. And in my opinion, crit should always win once you're at the hit cap, obviously. Okay, guys. I'll try to think of something for another video and see you in the next one.